Did you ever stop and wonder if you could be related to everyone with your last name?
Just think if you're a Lincoln, how you'd be congratulated if Honest Abe were someone you could claim.
To clear up any mystery, just check your family history.
Genealogy's the name of the game. Now some ancestors you'll find you want to hide,
but most of them will fill your heart with pride.
Oh, your family tree, your family tree. Check your genealogy, find who was who and how who came to be. On your family tree.
Welcome, listeners. It's time for the Genealogy radio show, the radio show that's keeping you in the loop. And this week's show is all about West Cork surnames and sources. West Cork is a beautiful cultural region in County Cork, known for its fantastic peninsulas such as the remote Beara Peninsula, Sheep's Head and Mizzen Head. It has beaches such as Inchydoney, Onahincha and Barley Cove, and lots of towns and villages such as Skibbereen, Clonakilty, Kinsale, Rosscarbery, Baltimore, so on. The area of West Cork is not strictly defined. Its broadest definition, it includes all parts of County Cork south and west of the River Lee, with the exception of Cork City and suburbs. And you have the West and West Cork signposted, with the town of Bandon described as the gateway to West Cork. However, both Carrigaline and Macroom are also gateways to the region. A large part of the areas are contained in both the Catholic and Church of Ireland dioceses of Ross. These dioceses no longer exist separately, but are part of the larger diocesan Cork and Ross and Cloyne in the case of Church of Ireland. There are lots of resources for genealogy in the area, and the surnames that are prevalent in the area, though there are many more: Evans, Burns, Canty, Welpy, McCarthy, O'Donovan, O'Mahony's, O'Leary's, O'Driscoll's, Moxley, Dempsey, Scanlon's, Rochford's, Skews, Sullivan, Crowley, Donovan, O'Leary again, and Baker, Ducalo, Beamish. We looked up a lot of these and found some very interesting stories about them. The Evans, for example, sounds very Welsh, but translated into Irish, O'Heverin, and that can go into a variant of Hevereen, Heverin, Heverison, Hefferin. Going back to the Irish variant can provide many other variants. So if your search sounds very English, I would suggest that you do translate to the Irish surname, because you may find many different variants of it. Now, in this area in Skibbereen, where the McCarthys really held sway of this, and in Skibbereen it still remains one of the town's most common surnames, on the height of the famine, the body of an unnamed boy taken for lifeless was placed in a coffin in the town square, conveyed for burial in the Abbey cemetery, and as he was lowered into the pit, the youth regained consciousness and walked unaided from the grave. So some hard-hitting stories of the famine in this area. It's probable that some 8,000 to 10,000 famine victims are buried in the famine burial pits in Abbey Strevrury Cemetery. The Temperance Hall was the site of the Foundation's first temperance society abstaining from alcohol in Europe. It was built in 1833 and it has been succeeded now by Skibbereen's 26 well-patronised pubs. General Michael Collins had his last meal in the Eldon Hotel in Skibbereen before he was shot in ambush later that evening in 1922. So when looking at the surnames, we looked and resourced the sources there. And of course, we found the wonderful Skibbereen Heritage Centre, skibheritage.com. And I rang them this morning and they could not be more helpful. Very giving of their time. The website is absolutely fantastic. It gives many different sources for your surnames that you're looking for. It has the Great Irish Famine Exhibition, Famine App, Famine Book, Famine Sites, and has a great deal of people who come researching there are looking for their ancestors from famine times, it really provides a great deal of sources. Genealogy. It isn't a genealogy centre, it's a heritage centre, but it has a fantastic genealogist who comes very recommended, Margaret Murphy. And she has great local knowledge and great, I suppose, wider than local knowledge, because West Cork is such a vast area, and she has that information. So it is people like that who are responsible for the fantastic databases that are free to search online on this, and I've spent the morning searching through them. You have loan records, and they're the reproductive loan records for the famine, and I'll talk about them in a few minutes. The school records, the tenant records, the tithe books, West Cork townlands and West Cork graveyards. There are diaspora stories, there are the Loch Hyne exhibition and books, and so on. So just to talk about a little bit about some of the surnames first of all. Canty, an interesting name with many different origins. It may be an anglicised form of the Gaelic Irish, O'Hantic, which derives from cantoch, meaning satirical, hence descendant of a satirist. It is indeed the name of the bardic family who came from West Cork. One Fairfassa O'Canty was a well-known poet in the early 17th century. And in the census of 1659, the name Canty is given as one of the principal names in the barony of Kilnamaliki, County Cork. The sept spread into the neighbouring counties of Limerick and Kerry, where this tradition of the Irish bardic family of West Cork is very well known. The poems in Irish can be seen on the UCC Celt website, and I'll be producing a blog on this, so I will find Osborne Bergen's translation of these poems. The surname, meaning satirical, is important, so because these bardic poems were satirical, and they were known as the journalists of the time. They deviate somewhat towards poetry as what we would think poetry as being. And the bardic order existed in prehistoric times. Their position in society was well established in earliest tradition. The subject meant that this would have gone to bardic schools and so on from the 13th century. And the compositions are very telling because they tell us an awful lot about what's going on with the society of the time. This poet, Fairfassa Canty, actually petitioned Florence McCarthy, and because he wasn't getting patronage from the McCarthys, when Florence, the most dangerous man in Ireland, was incarcerated in the Tower of London in the early 17th century. So we get to know what's going on with Florence McCarthy at this time. Now, when we were looking for the names of the reproductive loans, which we found on a site describing the reproductive loan inhabitants of Durras, we went through the list of names and picked out some of them to describe them. So we had Crowleys, very numerous, mainly Cork, but also Kerry, Limerick, Clare, Waterford and Connacht. And it's always the translation of the names that are very telling as well. O'Cruakick, Heart Hero. They were originally a branch of the MacDermots in Roscommon, and it's said they settled in West Cork and formed an important sept there. And there's also another route for them as well, Macrohalig. The Beamish, quite numerous in Cork, Ulster English, 16th century when they settled in Kerry, and have been associated also with Cork. The Dempseys, the sept was seated in Clonmacnoise, Laois, Offaly until dispossessed in the 17th century. The O'Dempseys are of the same stock as the O'Connors of Offaly and were a powerful clan in the territory lying on the borders of Laois, Offaly. And so when they do get expelled from areas and go to other areas, it shows that you can have different places that you can search for your ancestry as time. They were very distinguished in the defence of their country, and the O'Dempseys, the chief of Offaly, was one of the few Irish leaders who could boast as having defeated Strongbow in a military engagement which he did in 1172. So they have a very antiquated history and very interested indeed. The McCarthys, very numerous in all areas, particularly in Cork, and McCarthy from the first name Carthic, meaning loving. So one of the leading septs in Munster, displaced at the invasion to Cork and Kerry. The Muskerry branch are seated in Blarney Castle. Ducalo. Some funny, unusual surnames like this. Well, this interesting and unusual surname is of Old French origin, or initially introduced into England by the Normans after the conquest, and subsequently by French Huguenot refugees fleeing religious persecutions in their own country. Regan, O'Regan, perhaps the diminutive of Rhea King, a sept of Meath and one of the tribes of Tara who were dispersed at the invasion. So there were many other septs in Thomond and Cork. And all these are very useful when you're doing your DNA and to be able to understand that that's why these locations are appearing. Now, on looking at the reproductive loans on the database of the Skibbereen Heritage Centre, I came across an amazing number of names. The reproductive loan funds were the 19th century institutions that provided credit to the poor of Ireland. At their peak in the years immediately prior to the Great Famine, up to 13 individual loan funds operated in the greater Skibbereen area in West Cork, putting 75,000 into circulation into the local economy over a 10-year period. This amazing collection can also be viewed at Find My Past, and that dates from 1821 to 1874, but that's a fee-paying website. The records come originally from the National Archives, and they are available online. The majority of the records cover the years 1824 to 1846 and provide unique information about ancestors from before and during the Irish famine. They're an excellent resource for the Irish family historian because they record the names of individuals who are then missing from usual official government records. Many of the records are loan application forms, which include the name of the borrower, 2 names of the guarantors, who were usually close family members or neighbours, and other details recorded include the occupation, the notes of health, the family circumstances, or whether the borrower emigrated. So this is very telling. The records survive for Kilmoe and Crookhaven, Scull, Durris, Craig, Baltimore, Castletownshend, Glandore and Balladine funds. So these key details are really important. And when we're looking at the surnames, it's quite sad to realise, though, that they came looking for the money back after the famine. So in 1853, after the British Treasury had assumed responsibility for the funds, it was decided to call in the outstanding loans. So that's why we have these records existent. The local police constables submitted detailed returns, townland by townland, reporting on the debtors who were still in the area, who had died, who had emigrated. We looked at the Durris area. Many of the files were misdescribed as Ballymore, and that's what it said in the source we looked at. And some of the names are quite telling indeed. So we have Ellen Spillane. She had to surrender the land. She still lived in the same area. She was supporting herself by small traffic in eggs. Her husband is dead and her children are doing for themselves. John Ducalo, which we mentioned as being of Huguenot origin, the name, at present a poor shoemaker. Timothy Sullivan, notice the lack of an O there. The O and the mock get dropped and taken up at various different times. John Holley, W-H-O-O-L-L-Y, and that's actually got 2 O's in it. It's an unusual surname. And it's O'Hulig, Ulach, proud. It was an agnomen adopted by some of the O'Driscolls of West Cork, so there are close relations there. We have Mary Connolly, Pat Donovan, Michael Hurley, Daniel Holland, John Shanahan. All these surnames give us a wealth of information. Charles King, Owen Sullivan, Thomas King, James Williamson, Kitty Sullivan, Foleys, Donovans, Caverleys, Murrays, Goggins, Minahans, and many of these names may be still in the area, or many may not. Lyhan or Lehan may not be there, and how that is spelt at Lyhan may be a variant that now is surviving overseas, but doesn't survive. It tells us whether they emigrated or not. For example, we have Michael Stanley Lawrence, Lehan, Carrickboy. The name is the place is crossed out. A poor blacksmith, 1853, in America. The occupations are given such as a poor tailor, a poor labourer, a poor farmer, 1853, in England. So the Caverleys went to England. And these sources are absolutely invaluable indeed. Now we also have the tenant lists as well. And the tenant records, the estates, are important, where you can look on the Moore Institute in NUI Galway for the estate records. And they give you a great deal. So you have the Ricks and Beecher estates, the Craig estates, and Ricks and Beechers would have covered well over 18,000 acres in this particular area. And how they get their land is very important, because they usually get it during going back into Elizabethan times. So they would be given those as part of their rewards for soldier services and bits and pieces. And then they may marry and end up with a double-barrelled name. For example, William Rickson of Ballygiblin assumed the name of Beecher and was made a baronet in 1831. He married an actress, Miss O'Neill, and had a number of children. Griffith's valuation records show the Rickson Beecher holding an estate in the parishes of Castlemagner as well. So you don't just get them in one place. You can get them in a cross-section of places. In the barony of Duhallow, for example, in County Cork. So these sources, who they marry into over time, certainly extends what you're able to do. And the wonderful thing about the Skibbereen Heritage Centre is, though I'm talking to you about it on radio, it is available to search online. And that's the key here. So when you search, I just went into the tenant records and I put in a surname, and then I was able to find all the Driscolls that were in that particular area. And it was very telling that I could actually see these database records. I could see the townland name from the annual rent, the payment, and so on. So it gave me up 14 Driscolls. It gave me one Canty. So I can find out who the first names are, because it frequently tells me I have a Bartholomew, Tony Driscoll in Lissamore, and how things were paid, whether they were paid by cash. And we have a Cornelius Driscoll in Derrygureen, and he's a Coast Guard. So many people in this area in West Cork would have had their living from the sea. And the Skibbereen Heritage Centre is based in the old Gasworks building, Upper Bridge Street, Skibbereen, West Cork. And it opens from March onwards, but it very much is by appointment, I presume, from November, but an absolute fantastic centre and fantastic resources. So just to make a few announcements, there will be a blog on the surnames of West Cork, because we wouldn't expect you to be able to take in everything in 20 minutes. And we found such an area rich in genealogy, and largely because of the work of Skibbereen, who are putting the records, which one wouldn't think of, the tenants listing for the Ricks and Beecher estates, the Craig estates. All these give just a wealth of knowledge for clans and surnames. Our wonderful surnames of Moxley, meaning bushy-haired, resides there. And so please do look up the Irish and get the translation. So the McCarthys, meaning loving, the Dempseys, loyal heroes, and so on. And what their original septs were going back 1,000 years. So, just to make a few announcements, our surname history will be Nova Scotia. We're going to be doing the Irish in London. We'll be covering the Irish in Australia, the Irish in New Zealand, and doing several shows on various different locales. And always looking at sources as well, because sources are as important as surnames. They give the place, they give the context, and they give the whole reason why people are coming and going as well. To make an announcement, UCC have obtained the national commemoration for the famine for the 12th of May 2018. So that's a date to put in your diary, and we'll be doing a lot of shows on that as well. So for today, that's all, and thank you for listening.
Did you ever stop and wonder if you could be related to everyone with your last name?
Just think if you're a Lincoln, how you'd be congratulated if Honest Abe were someone you could claim.
To clear up any mystery, just check your family history.
Genealogy's the name of the game. Now some ancestors you'll find you want to hide,
but most of them will fill your heart with pride.
Oh, your family tree, your family tree. Check your genealogy, find who was who and how who came to be. On your family, 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 family tree.